Hi ho. Hey everybody, Harry here. It's the MSP Tech Talk, the fall quarter. We're headed into the Thanksgiving week, but we're going to sneak in one, if not two more webinars. But today we're focused on SMB Azure Part 2. I am coming to you live from the Gaylord by the Denver International Airport with Ingram 1. Briefly, it's been a 3-day out here at Ingram, and yesterday people asked me if there were huge breakthroughs at this conference, and I said, well, no, not compared to the Bill Gates news yesterday concerning solar energy and a startup he has, and that was a true breakthrough, like going from the transistors to the integrated circuit in our industry. That is a game changer. So if that's the high bar, no, the Ingram 1 conference is fairly stable and focused on sustainability, a little conversation on AI and machine learning, of course. Let's jump right into it. A little bit of housekeeping. Use the questions feature to ask the questions. Jennifer Hallmark back in the radio control room will today take care of the questions as we go and have a couple poll questions. We're going to have a brief connection with our well-behaved community sponsors, Fortinet, thank you, SureWeb, thank you, that make it possible for us to do this long format academic series. And I think that's it. Let's get into it. So we'll go around the horn with the introductions. So Alex Fields, start with you.
Hi, I'm Alex Fields with Success Computer Consulting. We serve a lot of the SMB market here in the Midwest, Twin Cities area, Minneapolis, St. Paul. And as well, I have a blog at itpromentor.com. Was recently named an MVP in the Office Apps and Services category. And I think that's probably pretty much it for me.
Oh wow, yeah, that MVP announcement, that is recent. That's with the latest round of MVP announcements.
That's right.
Okay, well, congratulations. That's well earned. Let's jump over for now over to Michael Frazier. Sir, how is it in Seattle today? Is it raining like yesterday?
No, thankfully it's sunny today, I think. I don't really go outside all that much, so no, just kidding, it's sunny.
Introduce yourself, my friend.
Mike Frazier, Refactor, out here in Seattle, as Harry said. Been working on a platform to help MSPs to automate in the cloud, including Azure.
All righty, and then Zach, probably the one I've known the longest. You attended one of the old-fashioned SMB Nation fall conferences. I want to say that was 10, 11 years ago, and you went on the bike ride around Bainbridge Island. Is that correct, sir?
It's true. I let you torture me on the chilly hilly.
Yep. All right. Introduce you. Where are you located? What's your story? Introduce yourself.
Sure, you bet. I'm in lovely Santa Rosa, California, wine country, about 50 miles north of San Francisco. I'm happy today to report that the power is actually on, in spite of PG&E's efforts to turn it off for a lot of our area. I have a little MSP here. Been in business about 17 years. We try to act bigger than we are. I'm probably the least qualified panelist, so anything I say today is probably super questionable. But I have occasional harebrained ideas that bounce off Michael every once in a while, and he helps me make them reality.
There we go, and I'm just glad you're safe out there, my friend. All right, let's get into the topics at hand. So we got some talking points, and folks, let me tell you about the format. So in the SMB Azure Part 1 that we did several months ago, which Jenny will get you the link to, you could also find up on our YouTube channel, the SMB Nation YouTube channel. Encourage you to go through that, but that was more of I'm going to offer a case study with some work Zach and Michael have done. We had enough interest that we wanted to double click down into some of the mechanics of Azure. So we'll go around the horn. I certainly hear this all the time about Azure AD. So Michael, why don't you talk about extending the on-premises Active Directory to Azure, and we'll go around the horn from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the last presentation we did with Zach, or Wooden Spoon and Christian, his counterpart, was around taking on-premise Active Directory and getting it, in not only getting it into Azure, but also actually completely in some scenarios replacing it completely on premise, and being able to leverage other services like the Azure VPN capabilities to connect. At that time was on premise Sonic Walls. I think you still have Sonic Walls, but you're transitioning to Sophos, but still wanting to do the same process to be able to connect the on-premise networking equipment into Azure and moving Azure AD or moving the domain controller from on-premise into Azure. And actually, Zach, probably good to talk to, why you guys end up doing that. Obviously, you leveraged our platform to help with the automation side of it, but really, what was the reason behind doing it from a customer standpoint?
Sure. I mean, the driver, the main driver for this was, and this has been going on for a while, right? People are going to serverless environments, and the question for me has been, it's unquestionable that we do not want to deal with peer-to-peer networks. I mean, that was just not acceptable from a variety of standpoints. And so the question is, how do we implement fully blown Active Directory for these clients that don't have an on-prem server and do it in an affordable way for them, and do it in a repeatable way for us? So the idea, there are providers out there that provide directory as a service, but they don't really. Our whole key, the whole thing this is based on, at least the idea was, a full-blown Active Directory. I want full-blown Active Directory. I want group policy. I want the whole thing. I don't want some subset of that. And so clearly, the idea was to put a VM in the cloud and to plumb it all together. Further on, kind of coming, the genesis of the idea was several years ago, and since that time, there's Azure AD Connect, which allows you to do everything like connecting AD to O365. And we had not really been an O365 shop. We've been an alternate hosted Exchange shop. So the idea was, how do we get all of the stuff together and do it in a repeatable way? So the idea of putting it into Azure, that seemed to make a whole lot of sense. There's a bunch of flexibility in there with respect to, what kind of virtual machines you're using. Depending on, you can flex that depending on the size of the client. You can do things in a pretty affordable way. And then the question was, all right, how do we do this repeatedly? And that's really where Microsoft came in, and we started having conversations about, all right, how do we create a blueprint for spinning up a VM and getting everything connected? And there's, truth in advertising. There's some stuff that's completely automated. There are still parts of the process that are done manually, but the idea is we can get that AD server spun up in the cloud and do it quickly, both from a linear time perspective and a tech time perspective, to the point where it's actually workable and usable with the client.
All right, Alex, you want to jump in on that, sir? I always look to you for your technical writings with the good work we do at M365 Nation. Any thoughts before we go to topic number 2?
Yeah, no, it's actually really interesting to hear that story from Zach and Michael, and see how folks are doing it differently in different places. The serverless, I think, is a huge driver. I mean, every client that I consult with these days seems to be like, can I get rid of this box in my closet? That's like the number one request. And it makes sense, because we're in an age now where it's not, you don't really need that. You don't need to make that big hardware investment if you don't want to. It's kind of a pain in the ass, to have to, shift and lift and migrate, all that stuff, every 3 to 5 years or whatever. So to do without that headache is really attractive to a lot of small businesses. And we've actually taken a slightly different tack in that when we approach the problem, we look at what they have left in their stack. What are they using in their technology stack? A lot of our customers have gone to Office 365 for email already. So that was, we're already an Office 365 shop. And then we look at what else they have. So a lot of times it's, file shares. Well, that can be handled in OneDrive, SharePoint Online, things of that nature. And in some cases, it's even better than a traditional file server, simply because you have modern collaboration tools there, OneDrive, Teams, SharePoint. Those are designed for file sharing in the modern world. It's not the same as just being able to, in a file server, you're pretty much relegated to attaching a file to an email and sending it. An email is just not designed for that. So that's one area that is a huge win for customers, usually the files in the cloud. But then looking at Active Directory and group policy and so forth, that's where we're leveraging more of Microsoft 365 Business. And so most of our customers who are going serverless are joining their computers to Azure AD and being managed through a modern management framework like Intune. And then the one time that we'll use like the Azure infrastructure as a service, so we still have that out there. We still have some clients who use that. It's when they have line of business apps that are reliant on Windows Server infrastructure still. So in an ideal world, I suppose everyone could go to SaaS, for everything. And like if you had a CRM that was on premises, maybe you could move that to something more modern like Salesforce or something in the cloud, or if you had QuickBooks, maybe you go to QuickBooks Online. But what we're seeing is, for a lot of the line of business vendors, for whatever reason, they're not quite there yet. Like if they have a cloud offering, it's maybe not quite up to what the expectations are for those customers. So a lot of people are still kind of stuck to their legacy apps.
Like
and
QuickBooks?
We end up building an infrastructure in Azure to host those applications, and then it's a matter of getting them connected.
Yeah, no, we'll double click down into that a little bit later after we hear from SureWeb and so on. So no, but thank you. Let's talk migrate a file server to Azure. So the actual mechanics of that. Alex, I'm going to reverse order. Let's start with you and we'll end up with Michael. Migrate a file server to Azure. What's your experience?
You have a lot of options here. So like I mentioned, OneDrive and SharePoint online and Teams and so forth. So generally speaking, that's a really ideal place to work on active file shares and file workloads that people are collaborating actively on. And the reason is you can get to those files on any device. Mobile devices have native apps for that stuff. You can get to it from almost any place, even just a web browser or whatever. And that really is great for people. You can also, instead of like attaching a file to an email, you'll be able to use sharing links, which are a lot better in a lot of ways because you can have a single source of truth that you're collaborating on, inviting people into your house to do work according to the rules that you've laid out, and rather than sending a piece of data out there and then having, first of all, you don't have control of that data, and second of all, you have versions shipped back and forth and all of that. So that's kind of like the number one choice. But as I mentioned, there's certain line of business apps, and especially if they have document management systems that are stuck to a traditional Windows Server environment. Sometimes those file shares need to continue living in just like an SMB file share. And in that case, you can host those in a virtual machine in Azure, or they also have Azure Files as an option as well. So there are multiple ways of doing it. And if you go the more traditional route, you can use traditional methods like Robocopy to move that stuff across, provided you have that virtual network connection or whatever to the Azure cloud. But otherwise, if you're doing SharePoint or OneDrive, there are migration tools. We actually find that it's even better for the client to kind of take that opportunity to clean house, because whenever I look at a file server, there's about 80 to 90% of it that is just not used anymore. It's typically dead data.
Yeah, it's like moving from a long time house.
Yeah, and so we usually ask them to let's create some new containers in the cloud for you. Let's stand up some new teams, for example, where your major departmental units they work in, and let's move the active files there, like not copy, but literally move, like cut and paste, and so they're no longer available on the old file server. And then at a certain point, the old file server, we just lock that into a read-only mode, and you can't save to it anymore. But it's still there for reference and archival purposes. They can choose to archive that off onto other media, or we can move it to like a cloud repository somewhere else, just for reference or for compliance or whatever. They need to keep it around for a while. But generally, that stuff doesn't go into like OneDrive and SharePoint because we consider those to be more like active workloads.
So Zach, you're the one carrying the bag out there as well. Have you had the great pleasure of doing a lift and shift to Azure from a file server?
Small scale, not large scale, and I think that Alex covered most of those scenarios, and that's been our experience. Moving, my experience has for sure been a lot of the stuff that people have is just, it's old. So using the tools that are out there, moving stuff to SharePoint is really seamless, relatively easy to do, and then syncing back. What we've tended to do, we definitely using OneDrive, OneDrive for Business client to provide users access to those files, and so far so good. That's working seamlessly. The experience that we're having and the challenges that we're having are pretty much the same ones that we've already talked about. People, a lot of clients are using QuickBooks or other accounting packages that don't have a cloud-based offering, or other line of business apps that don't have a cloud-based offering. So you either got, you end up with some kind of local box. For us, it's generally been, even a Windows workstation box that's used as either for SMB file share or for printer sharing with that controlled via GPO from the AD server in the cloud. So I don't know that we're as far along. It does not sound to me like we're quite as far along on that curve as Alex's company is, in that we haven't taken any of our big clients in that direction. That being said, having experience with the smaller clients and getting some experience doing that, the roadmap for that for the larger clients becomes pretty clear. It becomes much more straightforward. It's not nearly as intimidating as the thought is like, oh my gosh, how are they going to deal with not having a server? Now it's like, oh yeah, okay. Figure out the stuff they absolutely have to have a local server for, and most of the stuff they don't. So.
Well, Zach, you hit on a point that I want to emphasize, and folks, I also want to remind you to use the questions feature to ask your questions. Chinny Hallmark will interrupt us as we go. But Zach, the webinar, the title is Azure and SMB Part 2. You validated in Part 1 that it can be done down in the S of SMB, and that's where SMB Nation's reputation is, and we tend to play. So Success Computers out of Minneapolis with Alex Fields. Alex, how many employees do you have? You're a little bit bigger organization, if you don't mind.
Yeah, we are. So I think we have about 300 active clients. I think we're about 75 employees or so now. So it's grown quite a lot over the last few years. I mean, I think I joined this organization in 2009, so it's like 10 years ago now. And I think when I joined, there was just under 20 employees. So it's doubled a couple of times since then. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
No, you've answered. No, thank you. I just wanted to give a I want the audience to have perspective that I would offer. Success Computing is certainly has a mid-market play, and Zach, you're validating the S of SMB. Michael, I don't know if you can add any more to migrate a file server to Azure, or do you want to take the next topic, please, on running a VM?
Yeah, I would just add to that too, that there are other third-party products as well that people look at as well in conjunction with. So sometimes OneDrive itself may not work, or using Windows file server natively doesn't work either. So there's other players out there like CenterStack. They just have to meet the type of scenario that people want to use. And what I've found overall, especially because we're very focused on the automation and repeatability of being able to build solutions in the cloud and really anything as code, it's can you programmatically create something and repeat it? Because I know, talking with Alex last call, they're using ARM templates. We're doing it with Zach. Some people are using PowerShell. But the key to all of this stuff is it easy enough for you to repeat it when you're whether you're trying to move a file server over, or setting up a new AD server, or even anything as a service like Azure AD as a service, or Azure Backups, or anything. Is there a way to repeat it and be able to do that for each customer, so that you can standardize the process? Because what we're all looking for is the ability to have a standard approach to being able to provide solutions to customers. And I think that Azure allows for us to do that even more so, because it gives us a way to programmatically deploy solutions. But it also means that we have to look at what we're trying to build for a customer and repeat. And so to Alex's point, usually I don't see file servers migrated as they are. I call it garbage in, garbage out. And you want to make sure at any point in time when you're doing a major change for the organization, and if that's a migration to the cloud, it's just a major change, then use that as a time to actually refactor your approach to whatever service you're putting into Azure or wherever.
There, I see what you did there. Drop the refactor name right into
Yep. I was waiting for you to notice.
Yeah, there's always a little bit of that. Well, hey, I want to catch one point before we take that next bullet point, and that is repeatable and scalable. And of course, that's been a big theme here at the Ingram One conference in Denver, and again, pretty much every conference that's going on right now, it's about scalability. So, Michael, start with the VM conversation, and then we'll go around the horn. I think this is working out pretty well.
Yeah, the hosting application running on Windows or Linux. So I would say that if you were going to be getting, and it depends on the application, right? So if you're going to use, I got customers that are hosting stuff with IIS, others that are doing LAMP stacks or various different stacks on Linux, and it really comes down to, and this is actually where kind of to the file server to Azure conversation, it's applicable to migrating an application or running it on a Windows or Linux VM in Azure, is that there's other services too, and at that point in time, it's also another place to refactor, for lack of a better word, your application and the infrastructure that goes along with it. Because we have a lot of customers that are if migrating apps over, but they're looking at changing from using VMs to utilizing containers through like Azure App Services, being able to even roll like Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS. And we even ourselves internally use AKS and ACI on our main platform. ACI is the Azure Container Instances, because it was something we needed to do from a security standpoint as well as an architectural standpoint. So I would just say that when you're looking to host an application in the cloud, assess exactly is that again another point of time where you can look at possibly making some major changes to your architecture and looking at other offerings that Azure has if you're moving to Azure in any of the services that are offered, because that could make a lot of sense. And then the other point I would make is that Microsoft has made and is still making a lot of major push towards trying to support as much as possible jointly between Windows and Linux, whether it's being able to run shell scripts or bash scripts and being able to do certain things on a Windows box that you would never have thought of, bringing SSH to Windows, various things that are going to also just help people to go, hey, you know what, I can just run, I can figure out what I want to run, or like .NET Core running on Linux. It's like now you can really just pick and choose what makes the most sense for your particular scenario, as opposed to just being completely pigeonholed into, well, I built on this technology on this operating system, so I'm stuck there in perpetuity. So it's very nice to see that there's a lot of changes that have been made at Microsoft over the past few years to really be receptive to supporting the open source community. And we even have the first customer I've ever seen using Windows containers in Azure. I never thought I'd say the day that Windows containers were going to be used, but we actually even have a client using them now. So it's just interesting to see people moving their application workloads and what they decide to choose. This particular customer had some ASP code and some stuff they had to have being able to run on Windows, but it's overall interesting to see what we end up honing in on from an architecture standpoint when people look at moving their applications to Azure.
So, Alex, we're on the same topic. I'm going to ask a stupid question, and I really kind of have a knowledge gap. I have not obviously spent as much time in this area as I'd like to. That's why we have a panel of experts. But what's the alternative to the VM scenario? Is that what we call bare metal, that you run the application natively in an Azure instance versus a VM?
No, I mean, like for our market, there's maybe a very small set of customers that we have that are using something other than just virtual machines in Azure. So we have a couple of organizations we support that basically they are software dev shops, and they are basically if they used to build applications in an on-premise environment where they were hosting a combination of Linux and Windows boxes, and maybe they're running SQL databases or whatever. They're starting to develop that stuff into the Azure platform as a service. So services like Azure SQL and web services and things of that nature. But mostly, especially for the S of SMB, it's really just, if they used to have a Windows virtual machine on a piece of hardware in their closet, now they've got it in a, virtual machine that lives in the Azure cloud. And, it's, I still kind of think that that's probably going to be a temporary situation. I think that most people want to be in more of a SaaS model. So like if a lot of the customers that I deal with that were on QuickBooks, I'll just use that as an example. A lot of people would love to go to QuickBooks Online. They wish they could, but it just isn't there yet. They say it doesn't quite support everything that they needed to do, or that can't take some of the customers. Yeah. And we hear that with a few other ones too, but that's just a big one that happens a lot, that they wish they could go to QuickBooks Online, but they're just not able to. So they got to keep it around on a virtual machine. And there are other providers. You don't have to go to Azure. There's other people out there who kind of do host, like Right Networks, I think, hosts QuickBooks for folks, and we've got some customers using that. But if you've got any kind of Windows-based application and you don't want to have a physical box anymore, you don't have to. You can run it on a virtual machine in Azure just like you could run it on a virtual machine in your closet. But to Michael's point, there's also a whole lot of other things you could do potentially. So some applications you might not need a Windows server for anymore. And they have other options in the Azure cloud that might be less expensive. So typically, like that infrastructure as a service where you're renting virtual machines, that can add up. We've got customers using it. It's a few $100s a month, but some of them are even more like a few $1,000s a month. So, if we have any volume of people, like I would say, like we've got I was just working with one recently. It's like about a 50-person network, and they have, on a regular basis, there's probably around 40 or so people connected at any given time to a couple of remote desktop server hosts. And then they have, a database server for applications and Active Directory servers and stuff in the background. And they're probably paying about $5,000 a month. And that's not a cheap amount of money, But again, it's seen as a temporary pain because their goal is to get off of that database app. And as soon as that database app is gone and they're on something that is more of a SaaS model, all that infrastructure is going to go away, and they'll just be joined to Azure AD and using their files in OneDrive and stuff like that. So,
one point I'd like to just piggyback on.
Having the S of SMB, I don't know. It's a good question.
Michael, go ahead.
I just want to piggyback on that. So one other thing to think about too, and I think this is something that we don't think about from a cloud provider, because you just think, okay, we're going to move, we're going to lift and shift, or we're going to create new services to replace other things that we have deployed on premise. And the thing to think about too with like Azure, like in that scenario too, is like your storage copies go up, right? Like if you're doing local redundant versus geographic versus zone. And so you get multiple copies. So you get 3 of each time. And so you have to think about also like the enterprise grade capabilities on a hyperscale cloud versus what you have on premise too. Because I think a lot of times we don't really think about that. We're just like, hey, we're just trying to get the client this, this compute, the CPU, storage. We're trying to get them, mapping the same type of functionality, and not thinking about the other value add of the overall cloud provider, which is giving you capabilities and functionality, and even just built-in redundancy that you may not have, definitely not for most S clients, and even some mid-sized customers aren't going to still have the capabilities around the redundancies, the resiliencies, and the scalability of what you would get on Azure. So that's a conversation I always have, just trying to make sure that the customer knows, or the MSP engaging with the customer knows, like you are getting other value to what you're doing. And if you have a minute of downtime, or 10 minutes, or an hour, or 4 hours, 10 hours, however many, it's trying to also figure out like how quickly you can recover, back, on premise, being able to recover from, a BDR is great, but I may have to replace all my equipment. Well, in the cloud, I can get back up and running because I can just spin up new instances or instances of services in relatively short order in a very small, minute percentage of time, and even, fail over in a very programmatic way. So I would just piggybacking on that, where there's a lot of extra value that I think that we don't really usually quantify with customers when it comes to moving to Azure or any cloud provider, really.
All right, hey Zach, I'm going to keep you off the field for a play. We'll bring you right back on, but we want to have a spirited conversation with our friends at SureWeb, and I believe, sir, could you introduce yourself? Oh, we have a poll coming up, and then we'll do proper introductions while we're doing that. SureWeb recently had its annual conference up in Montreal about mid-October. And they have rebranded, so that is a lowercase w, little known factoid from SureWeb. And Jenny, I'll look to you to manage the poll and let us know when we're ready to talk SureWeb.
We have some Jeopardy music playing.
There we go. Well, unfortunately, folks, because I am the presenter on the screen, I am not seeing the poll, but thank goodness we have the capable Jennifer Hallmark in the background take care of this. And we only have her for about a week before she goes on a 1-month sabbatical, a well-earned vacation.
Oh, cool. Where's she going?
She is going to Thailand.
Oh man, nice.
Yeah, with her family. So to an undisclosed location, because I do want to ensure her privacy.
Sure.
All right, Jenny, are we ready?
A dead heated tie.
Hey, I stopped playing with that wood spoon, Zach. The name of your I heard that wood spoon.
Harry, you are back on and ready to go. It was a dead tie 50%.
Okay, so we have Eric from SureWeb. So Eric, introduce yourself, sir. Are you up in Canada? Canadians are cool. Or are you in the US?
I'm in Canada, but it's quite white and a little bit too much snow over here. So yes, it's cooler than we would like it to at this time of the year, especially. But yes, so I'm near Montreal, and my name is Eric Beauchamp. I'm in the product team for SureWeb, working specifically with the IaaS group. And so just to give a quick overview of what SureWeb is doing, if you go to the next slide, please. So it's a company that's been born in the cloud 20 years ago. And the number of partners, which are mostly MSPs, has been growing significantly. For sure, the wave of Office 365 has been one that we keep riding on, but now we're seeing infrastructure and helping with security and managed services as really a part of the growth. So the employees per se have doubled in the last 3 years. And in total, there's about 60,000 end customers from MSP. So in the SMB space as well that SureWeb is working with. Yeah.
Excellent. I'll go to the next slide.
Yep. So in terms of SureWeb, the positioning of the company is to be the one-stop shop. But at the same time, we don't have a catalog with thousands of solutions. Instead, we really aim to focus on the ones that are the leaders on the market and be good at supporting MSPs working with those solutions. So that's why when you see the main players here, it's a smaller catalog, but it's really a deeper expertise that the team has here in Montreal and Sherbrooke. So
yeah,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say a shout out to a couple logos that I recognize, and they play nice in the neighborhood. Harry's neighborhood or Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. And so shout out Microsoft, Google, Acronis, Bitdefender, Veeam, Office 365. Sorry to interrupt you, Eric. Please continue.
Yeah, no problem. So If we go to the next slide, please. So as you mentioned, so we have an event every year in Montreal where it's called the Accelerate Cloud Summit. So we have a couple hundred partners that attended this year. It was a 3-day event. And so we have sessions on different topics. And one of them is about having your VMs in the cloud, how to sell IaaS, and what are the main points. And so what we saw from the polls we were doing, so half the room was starting to get comfortable at selling them, and the other half not so much. So the journey is very different. Some will be at the level where Michael and Alex were describing, using containers really at the forefront. But for many of them, they still have those servers on site, and they're hesitating to move it. So we have guidance on not just the technical part, but how to set up your offers, how to build your plans, avoid the pay-as-you-go surprises in terms of costs. And for several of them, it's also where do you start? So I think you just referred to it, Michael. So Cloud DR can be a very nice stepping stone. If you go to the next slide, please. Quite often what we see is that this is, for MSPs, it's a simple way to get started, because you can quote by just having the number of VMs, the space that you need, and then you have a fixed cost that you can quote to your customers. And you can bring this as the very first step to have your cloud servers ready to boot up. So should something happen locally, whether it's a full disaster or partial disaster, it's one that is the most common stepping stone that we see right now. So we offer, of course, Azure site recovery, but we also have several data centers with our own performance cloud and Veeam products that are used for this. Yeah.
Eric, hold on just one second. Jenny just gave me a side note to remember to make mention that, folks, in your GoToWebinar control panel, so let's talk about this for a second. Typically on the right side of your screen, there is the ability to go get some handouts. And so SureWeb has provided some handouts for today. So I want to encourage you to do that while you're listening, or make yourself a little side note to do that when you have a spare moment with the webinar. But we have handouts. That's also where you'll ask the questions. And if you came in late, we're talking with our community sponsor SureWeb, and the topic of the overall MSP Tech Talk today is Azure and SMB. Eric, I interrupted you. Please continue. Would you like the next slide?
Yes, please. So still on the topic of cloud disaster recovery, what are the main criteria when you choose a partner? So you need proven success. So for sure, Azure, in terms of stability, performance, there's no doubt that it's working there, but make sure your provider can guide you to set up your disaster recovery plans, that the responsibility is well understood between your business, your customer business, and your provider as well on that front. And so can you also white label your service? Can you benefit from a strong partner program to start building your offer? So that's all part of when you do DR with SureWeb, that's part of it. But more than that, and on the next slide, we see that SureWeb is the partner also for sales enablement. So we often get requests on, can you help us sell Azure? Can you train us technically? So with Microsoft, we organize several training events, sometimes on site, sometimes remote, as part of this. And we do have the compute, networking, storage expertise here. The team I'm working with, these are all the guys that are overseeing our own data center. So when it's time to speak about Azure, they know their stuff really in depth for that. So we also have a pre-sales architecture guidance team that will create quotes, create the diagrams so that MSPs can help their customers understand either a lift and shift, or if they're going a transformation way. So really nice support, and of course 24/7 support for Azure and all other SureWeb products for this. So.
Well, Eric, speaking of diagrams, the diagram on the screen I call the wheel of fun. So you have the partner in the center, and it's the wheel of fun, my friend. Would you like the next slide?
I believe that was my last one, actually. So, yeah.
Okay. And Eric, once again, totally appreciate your support of the SMB Nation community. Again, it's because of well-behaved, well-trained sponsors that we can have this long format, an academic format that we feel is adding real value in the 90 minutes to make it actionable, take it back with you. For the panelists, any questions about SureWeb or comments on SureWeb before we get back to the academic lecture?
Yeah, I do. So on your Azure IaaS pre-sales architecture, and just generally speaking, are you doing any automation, or is it more just, hey, guidance in the portal and helping from a professional services engagement with the partner? What's that look like?
So it's initially it's really to help with the quotes and to build the architecture in conjunction with the partners. But yes, we have professional services where we can do everything as well. For those who are starting and want to shadow maybe the how it's done. So we see that several times that the team will pair and work together for the first few contracts, and then the MSPs will be on their own for this. In terms of automation, we are working on different projects to for example, automate the migration of SBS and other components like this. It's not fully deployed yet, but we're working with Microsoft on different projects for automation. Yeah.
Excellent.
Cool.
Folks, give SureWeb a second look. Let's move on to the academic conversation, if we may.
Thank you very much.
All right, sure. And Eric, you are welcome to stay, but I also understand you guys are very busy, so thank you for your time.
Thanks for inviting us. Have a good day. Bye.
All right. All right, talking points continued. Extend Azure capabilities to your on-premises infrastructure. Michael will go first, Alex second, and Zach will finally get you back on the field.
Yeah, so I would say that, you know, kind of going back to the, you know, trying to figure out what you want to take from on-premise and migrate, you know, lift and shift as the term goes, to Azure, or figuring out what makes sense to move and what other services that you're looking for. You know, just like O365. One other thing that's been brought up is like Intune as well for policy management. So there's a lot of focus towards trying to, or from the Microsoft standpoint, trying to streamline the desktop experience too, from just the overall integration to everything Microsoft. And so I would say that looking at what that is, and then also a lot of the other security services too. So some things may not be applicable, especially if it's you know, the smaller business side of things, but there are definitely security services in Azure that could make sense for some customers, or even just as yourself as an MSP. If you're looking at like Microsoft Security Center or other services around, you know, hey, I just want to see, you know, what are the vulnerabilities that I may have in stuff that I have deployed, so just having some more visibility on them. So looking at that, and that's not so much extending, because most people don't even have that type of visibility on premise, other than you know, through some of the existing equipment that's deployed. So I would say, you know, you would increase your capabilities, maybe not even extend from on-premise to Azure. As for Azure back, it's interesting because you know, there are capabilities of integrations from Azure to on-premise to do certain things, like you know, being able to tie into Hyper-V, and if I want to have integrations to be able to move workloads from Hyper-V to Azure and vice versa. So very much kind of to the last talking point with SureWeb around DR, just generally DR is one that extending that in either direction I see used pretty heavily. And then, you know, from a standpoint of, you know, what other services you're using. So obviously O365 makes a lot of sense, OneDrive. So just looking at, you know, the different capabilities, and some of those are Azure, some of those is the full suite. So it just depends, but overall, look at all the different options in Azure, not just the IaaS, because there's a lot of other services that can be used in conjunction with on-premise stuff, like I said, like some of the security products and so on.
And I would offer we're just at the beginning of the era, even though Azure has been around for a while, but in many ways we're at the beginning. Alex, go ahead and tell the audience your site, your nonpartisan site for IT information, if you want to say that URL, and then pick up where Michael left off on the Azure talking points.
Yeah, no, sure. itpromentor.com is where I have a blog. Most of that centers around Microsoft 365, Office 365. We do a little bit of Azure there. I think I had a recent post on Windows Virtual Desktop, which is a fairly new addition to the marketplace as far as general availability. It's been around for a while in private preview and public preview, but recently went generally available. And there's a lot of excitement around that, I think, in the small to mid-sized market, because it's taking what was traditionally a fairly complex thing to do, EDI deployments, and kind of democratizing that and bringing that down and making it a little bit easier to deploy for folks. And of course, they don't have to manage all the infrastructure behind that either. I think Mike put it a really good way. Like, you shouldn't just look at the infrastructure services out there, because it's like basically a giant marketplace full of products, and anything from Internet of Things, to platform as a service, to infrastructure as a service, it's all there. And the most common services that we're probably consuming out of Azure, today in the small business, I think it is virtual machines at this point, just because of where we came from historically. Like, if it wasn't for that, I think moving into that marketplace and having a little bit more creativity and being able to pick out, what else might work for you, what else might you be interested in doing, or would you even be interested in potentially like hiring a developer to build something for you that's more custom, in a more modern way than or something for your organization. We work with partners to do that as well. So we don't do that in-house. We work with partners. Google Composer is one, which they can help you build a mobile app for your business and help, start to really add value. Like Michael's point is like, well, what else of value is out there? That's not just about lifting and shifting what I've known for the last 20 years, So.
Yeah, and panelists, if you could be so kind as to mute out when you're not speaking. We're getting a little bit of crosstalk I'm seeing on the sound monitor. So, Zach,
Alex, hold on, Harry. Alex, before we move forward, can you repeat your website, please? We have a listener.
Oh, sure. Yeah, itpromentor.com is the website.
All right, itpromentor.com. Zach, we're bringing you back on the field here. It's the late in the second quarter. What say you on this topic, my friend?
Thanks, Coach. So it's interesting. We're a small shop. We're 5 people, and for sure we've been in the mode of kind of lift and shift and sticking with alternate versions of technology that we're familiar with, partially because we don't have the R&D capability that some of the larger shops have. And so for sure, when I said earlier I'm probably the least qualified to speak about this stuff, I'm somewhat serious about that, in that the kinds of things that we're using right now really are more taking existing workloads and whether it's VMs and such, and putting those in the clouds. We're not in the cloud in Azure specifically, and we're not really making use of the other things in the marketplace. And so the reason for that is part of it's conceptual, right? Like, okay, hey, we want AD. How are we going to do AD? And Intune was not really in a place where it was going to do AD some time ago. I haven't, I'll admit, myself and my team have not had the time to do a deep dive on Intune and go, okay, well, is Intune good enough to use instead of a hosted AD server, and go the Microsoft 365 route rather than the hosted AD server, or looking, as Alex mentioned, Windows Virtual Desktops. I mean, that's something that has only recently come into my consciousness, and it harkens back to work that Michael and I were doing 10 years ago with virtual desktop infrastructure with some other vendors who shall remain nameless. But the possibilities that are represented by this technology Some of it's a little bit mind-boggling, but one of the things that we've done is we've really tried to kind of keep an open mind and go, okay, this is, like, don't get attached, excuse me, don't get attached to the way that you're doing things today is the way that you're going to be doing it a year from now. And it's super, super challenging. As an IT business owner, I'll say, one of the big things that we rely upon, especially in our managed services business, is consistency, right? You want to deliver consistent set of services across the client base so that it's, number one, it's easy to explain to the clients and it's easy to explain to your staff, and you're not having to retrain all the stinking time on new technology. But the reality is, of course, technology is changing, and of course, these different things are coming up. So what we're looking for are companies, and this will be a shameless plug, companies like Michael's, which enable us to reduce our R&D time and get some of the stuff implemented quickly and be able to repeat it. So it's not like, oh, okay, I have to do it from scratch every time, which is a pain in the butt. I mean, I'm assuming that most people have logged into the Azure portal. I will say the first time I logged in, right, it's one thing to log into a hosting control panel for most any hosting company that's doing hosted virtual machines. When you log into Azure, it is a whole other ballgame, and it's intimidating. And to know where to go to adjust little things, even small things, can be mind-boggling. So for small firms, I definitely think it's important to partner with somebody who is going to reduce your R&D time, enable you to make use of some of these products, which may not be obvious for you right off the bat, but if you can figure out a way to leverage these, I mean, clearly that's the way the industry is going. And my fear is, I don't want to be, hey, it's Wooden Spoon, it's the on-prem support company. Remember those guys, right? Like they take care of that. We want to be able to roll with that because there are companies that absolutely need it, right? As long as there are computers on site, they're going to need some kind of on-site support. Beautiful thing. But the question is, how do we integrate that in a thoughtful and repeatable and supportable, and come on, it's got to be in a profitable way. And my last point is, the whole thing that got me going on this was, hey, we've got these clients who've got peer-to-peer networks. There's an opportunity. There's a big opportunity with those. And I know that I go to conferences, I talk to my other peers, and there's always this drive of, oh, we want the bigger clients because bigger clients get better economies of scale and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's true until you lose one, especially if you're a small company. You lose a big client, and that'll wake you right up. And so there's, I think that there is space, and this is something that I don't think it gets talked about a lot. I think that there is space for the smaller MSPs to go after the smaller clientele and do it, and still do it in a way that yields the same kinds of margins that going after big clients yields. Yes, you have to deal with more clients, but bigger clients isn't always the answer. It's good to have diversity in the client base. And I know for us, I'll say, we survived, the 2009 time frame flat because we had a diversified client base, flat to a little bit of growth rather than biting the dust, which I definitely saw other people do. So anyway, I got a little off track there, but that's
but that's a valid point. And then I'll go to the next slide, and that is here at Ingram One in Denver. There is, I think they would spin it arguably a flight to quality, but loosely translated, there's a bias towards larger clients with the MSPs here in the Ingram ecosphere. And but I'm kind of with you. So I come to this conference every year, and I'm probably the hand raiser for the S of SMB, right? And Ingram is a big dog. So yeah, guys, don't give up on the little guys. That's how we got here. Let's move on. We're going to talk about Fortinet, who, again, one of our well-behaved community sponsors that's graciously underwritten this lecture. And here's the cool thing about Fortinet was they had a strong presence here at Ingram One. I went by and talked to them in the booth. Now, it was a slightly different team from Fortinet. Fortinet's a $4 billion company with a variety of employees, of course. And they, excuse me, would have, oops, looks like we're rendering the video. Jenny, let's go ahead and talk football with Fortinet, the Pittsburgh Steelers. and then I'll say nice things about them on the other side. Jenny, it's all yours.
We've had a lot of success, won a lot of big games here at Heinz Field, and part of our success has been the fans getting involved. They're investing in our success, and we're paying that back by giving them great connections to the team, to information, to the game itself. Steelers Nation Unite is our official fan loyalty program. It's very simple to sign up. It's a digital program where you qualify for various experiences by earning yards through just normal fan activities.
We utilize technology, and specifically Wi-Fi technology, to allow them to check in to RSVP, to let us know that they're the individual that's sitting in the seat or entering our building. We're interested in understanding our fans better and catering to them as it relates to what they want and what their needs are. That goes anywhere from providing opportunities with sponsorships, as well as picking the songs that go on the scoreboard and interacting with us on social channels.
Our decision to bring Wi-Fi into Heinz Field, that's one that we thought about for a long period of time. We did that thoughtfully. We are a brand that when we go somewhere, we've got to go there with quality and with assurance that it's going to be done very, very well.
The Fortinet firewall solution is protecting all business lines in our organization. That's anywhere from ticketing, marketing, stadium operations, security, and of course, football. When we were evaluating Wi-Fi providing solutions, we had a number of competitive bids. The thing that stood out with Fortinet's Wi-Fi, I was blown away by the speed and the capacity of the network, their attention to detail, and the intimate knowledge of the building that they wanted to gain. They were under seats, they were crawling in crawl spaces in the building. They cared about how the system worked for fans and how it worked for the Steelers organization. And that's what set them apart from all the other competitors and all the other technologies out there. The Pittsburgh Steelers are obviously known historically for our legendary defense. The cornerstone of that defense was built on Joe Green. We look at Fortinet to be that cornerstone with us.
Okay, Jenny, I think we're back.
I hope nobody was a Cleveland Browns fan, but no, it's a good video.
A story I told last time, I'll tell very briefly because the audience would have heard it last time, but the hook with Fortinet supporting the Pittsburgh Steelers is back when I carried the bag in the 90s, and one of the divisions in the firm I was in did Great Plains Dynamics, and so we supported the Seattle Seahawks. And that was very interesting because when you went into the server room at the Seattle Seahawks facility, they had a guard that went with you, because can you imagine the attractiveness of a hack at the Seahawks facility? That's probably what hackers dream about. So folks, give Fortinet a fair shake. I just spent some time with them here at Ingram One in Denver, Colorado. So they are out and about in the wild. Let's get back to the good stuff. Oops. And let me lower my camera down a little bit. So Michael, these were a couple of talking points you surfaced in particular in our planning session: security controls, different Azure services. Go, Michael, and then we'll go around the horn.
Yeah, absolutely. So I come from, I have a cybersecurity background too. I was a cybersecurity engineer in the Air Force and have worked with various cybersecurity companies and doing my own stuff. And it's funny because going to any cloud provider is obviously not going to solve your security issues, but it is at the very top of the concern list for anybody wanting to migrate to any of the cloud providers, including Azure. And so, as we're moving towards this shift of what I call IT as code, but essentially your infrastructure, your configuration, your security, everything just needs to be built as a holistic IT as code approach, as opposed to it being, hey, I'm going to build my infrastructure, then I'm going to configure, then I'm going to, or my, platform as a service or software. So it doesn't matter what it is, but anything that I'm going to deploy, then I'm going to configure it, and then I'm going to think about the security controls after the fact. And a lot of the products out there are reactive, not proactive when it comes specifically to security controls, because they're just expecting yep, you probably already rolled some of your own services out there. You probably made some major mistakes, and now we're going to help you fix those. And so I think, my philosophy is you should start from ground zero, especially, again, to go back to my point about if you're going to be making a major change to the technical, how your organization uses technology or how your customer uses technology, at that moment in time, you should be thinking about how you can now make it easier for you ongoing to be able to deploy and configure and iterate on your solution, and security control should just be something built in, whether it's, hey, I'm deploying some IaaS and I need to make sure that I'm programmatically installing and configuring and reporting back to the endpoint protection software, or I want to be able to make sure that I do a vulnerability scan to the infrastructure I deploy, or the as a service, anything I'm doing. Maybe it's against the API, but thinking about the security aspects of the different controls that you're going to have, whatever you're deploying. That's something that we've talked at great lengths, right, Zach, about, is it your identity with Azure or with Active Directory? How does that map? Can you utilize Azure AD to replace it? If not, why? What's your path over time to what that looks like? How does that map into being able to utilize it with your infrastructure? What are the controls that you want to have set for your network and if you're deploying VMs or other services? So again, just back to this more of this holistic mindset of security being baked into it as a holistic IT solution, IT as code solution, versus it being, oh, I'm going to add in something to look at the security of this and see what my controls are, and if I need to remediate, and having that built in. And I think as we move towards this future state of everything becoming IT as code, we're also thinking about how we can incorporate other products too, like, hey, if I want a virtual firewall appliance in conjunction with what I'm deploying, like Fortinet, for instance, would be a good example of that. But again, coming back down to like, do I need it for the customer? Does it make sense? It's making that assessment at a point in time, because any other service that you add in, for the most part, it's going to add additional cost to the customer as well. The monthly contract.
Okay, and Michael, I was doing something off screen for just a second, but before we go to Alex and Zach, so you met with the MSSP group at Fortinet, and as I made mention, Fortinet has been pretty active here at Ingram One in Denver. What can you tell us about that?
So there's some so we're looking at multiple different vendors, Fortinet being one of them, to be able to build automation content to make it easier. So I go back to this, if MSPs like Zach and even like Alex MSP, any MSP, whether you're small, medium size, or one of the larger MSPs, every MSP or MSSP is still looking for how can we do more with existing, not even with less. I mean, we have an existing talent shortage out there. It's only, say it's getting worse, but in the reality of the situation is IT is becoming more complex as we move and turn everything into, as I call IT as code. And because of that, anything that you want to bring to the cloud, so for instance, if I want to roll a Fortinet FortiGate in Azure, what do I have to do? I have to build out the infrastructure. I may be able to go to the marketplace and play around with it. But I always like to bring up, like, if I'm going to deploy a customer or a vendor's product, like a Fortinet virtual firewall in the cloud, am I going to deploy that firewall in isolation? Absolutely not. I'm going to use that firewall in conjunction with other services that I want to deploy with it. And so that goes to Zach's point about R&D. This whole process of being able to get into the public cloud and do it in a repeatable manner really gets down to the core of the problem, which is we're trying to get to this agile approach to be able to deploy, configure, and iterate a solution in the cloud. And as we want to add to it or make changes to it, we want to be able to do it just like we can do in the software world, where we have what's called continuous integration, continuous delivery, where every time I make some changes to a piece of software, I can push them out and have a new update. and usually do it on a pretty frequent cadence, you know, daily, weekly, you know, depending on the company. And taking that same approach to, you know, as an MSP, being able to do the same thing from a solution there. So whether it's Fortinet or any other product out there, the issue at hand is, you know, if you're going to deploy a Fortinet firewall, it's going to include infrastructure as code, right, through ARM templates. If you go and Google, you know, Fortinet, FortiGate, ARM templates, you'll find, you know, a Git repo with all these in them. But unfortunately, for the majority of MSPs, you're not going to just pick up those ARM templates and off to the races, because you got to first figure out, okay, what exactly do I need? Then once I know what I need, figure out how I'm going to deploy the ARM template, you know, parameterize it so I can make it repeatable. And then even after that, how do I also do the configuration of that, right? So now I got the next step, which is I got to build the configuration of it. And then the third piece of it is remediation, right? Because at some point in time, I may want to be able to go, you know, hey, I'm using a product out there like Perch or Scout, or somebody that's you know, I'm engaging with, that's giving me threat intel that I'm getting alerts on, and all of a sudden I get an alert. It's an actual incident that I'm going to go research. And once I go and do that, I want to be able to remediate on that. And so I want to be able to, you know, if I can configure, say, a Fortinet FortiGate, I should also be able to remediate where I can push a button and, you know, block an IP address, or, you know, whatever the automation task is. And so being able to have the full solution, everything becoming IT as code, gives you the ability to do that, because now you know the entire configuration of your infrastructure, and then everything behind it too. Because if I'm deploying a Fortinet FortiGate, I'm going to be deploying other services behind it, whether they're the traditional IaaS stuff we talked about, like VMs, role and SQL, whatever. It could be, you know, a remote desktop services deployment. It could be Citrix, could be containers. It doesn't matter what it is. I have something in conjunction with, and the whole reason I'm going to roll any product that I want, like a virtual firewall, is because maybe I need to connect it to all my other virtual firewalls to make it easier. Maybe I use the platform of that vendor as visibility throughout the entire, throughout my entire MSP, or with customers and throughout their entire organization. So you got to think about the use case and how it's being applied, and what exactly that you're getting by being able to add in other products like Fortinet. Because at the end of the day, you may not even want to put a virtual firewall in the cloud. It may not make any sense. But if you don't do that, it goes back to the security controls piece, which is you really need to be cognizant of exactly how you've configured your services, because you can absolutely lock down and map security controls to have the ability to ensure that you're compliant or whatever requirements that you have from the services that you've deployed. But you also need to be cognizant of the fact that you may need other products on top of that for visibility's sake, like Microsoft Security Center, or even, you know, we have customers that are using like Microsoft Sentinel, which is a cloud-based SIEM, because they want to have the ability to, you know, have more visibility overall on everything that's coming in from every system's logs out there, and being able to correlate data and doing their own alerting as well. So whether you're using an existing, you know, like I mentioned, like MSSP, like Scout, or you know, Perch for threat intel and being able to give you alerts, or you're trying to do it on your own, you really still need to come back to, like, okay, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? And what value am I giving to my customer? And is this going to help me as the MSP have visibility? And at the end of the day, manage the risk that I need to with my customer, because cybersecurity is all really about risk management, right? Like, what's my risk tolerance as a company, and also, like, what's my compliance requirements, and what will happen if I get audited and now I get cited for some issues that arise that I need to that I have out there. So.
Okay. Hey, Alex, before we go to you, and then we'll check in with Zach as well. But folks, we have 20 minutes left, and I want you to remember that SureWeb has some handouts over in your control panel, and be sure to use the questions feature to ask your questions. 20 minutes left. So Alex, can you add some value, additional comments on security controls?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we spend a lot of time with, obviously, in the last few years. And we, at Success Computer Consulting, we were traditionally just an MSSP. We've been developing more of an MSSP model as well. So that's another offering that we've had for about 2 years now. And in there, we basically were the approach that we decided to take, because when we were first looking out at the marketplace, like what, security partners do we want to, get in bed with and all that stuff. And if you go to any vendor out there, you go to any of these conferences and you meet with these security vendors, they all have a maturity model, right? And the maturity model always looks exactly the same, no matter what vendor you look at. It's, on the far left of the sheet, there's usually a column that describes some attributes of a legacy product they have or of a competitor's product. And then in the middle column, they'll have kind of their bread and butter that they're selling. This is like our go-to-market. That's our flagship product. That's where we want you to be. Now you're managed. And then they've got like a premium offering on the far right, and that's like you're optimized or whatever. But that's a pretty poor way of choosing how you're going to look at security. And so what we were looking for is like more of a platform agnostic, standard set of security controls. So NIST is one that we refer to. Another one is CIS, which is a really easy one for a lot of businesses who don't know where to start and don't know what regulations or compliance bodies that they may be subject to now or in the future. It's a good place for them to start, because a lot of those standard security control frameworks will map to really common things, FedRAMP and HIPAA and FERPA and just anything you can imagine. So we started building our offerings based on that, and what we found is that you really can't find one security vendor out there that's going to be able to partner with you and do all the things that you need to do, because you're looking at a variety of things. You're looking at endpoint security. You're also looking at identity security. You're looking at the inventory and control of your software and hardware assets and all the rest of it. So there's a lot of little pieces we pull together. I mean, in the Microsoft space alone, there's just a ton of options. In what that means in the terms of Microsoft 365, where I do the most of my work, is we always start with identity, right? That's like the kind of the cornerstone of our, what they call like identity is the new control plane in the cloud, right? So Azure Active Directory typically is where we start there, and we try to tie as much of our infrastructure to that as possible. And like I said, a lot of our customers now, if they used to be on traditional Windows server, they're moving into a more of a serverless environment, and their primary identity provider is going to be Azure Active Directory. If they have third-party applications, whether that's Salesforce, whether that's some other vendor out there, maybe some of people are collaborating on Box or ShareFile or some other place that's not outside the Microsoft universe, we try to tie those back to Azure Active Directory as well, so that we can have all of the audit information coming into one place. And if you apply controls like multi-factor, you only have to deploy them once and not several times. So multi-factor authentication, conditional access, which is another major boon and benefit for the small and mid-sized business. And what this allows us to do is start really taking control of not only that initial authorization of identity, but also tying things like your device to the identity, your location, and things of this nature, and using some of those other signals to determine like how risky is this sign-in, and should we allow it through, should we challenge it for multi-factor, should this account be blocked or required to change its password, and so forth. And so a lot of those tools, that just wasn't accessible to, you wouldn't have been able to provide those in an on-premises world, and now we have those kinds of things in the cloud. And it's really fairly easy actually to implement once you start getting into it. They've made it pretty simple to implement. And when you start to turn some of those dials on, you're solving for a lot of those security controls. So just like look at the very first control in the CIS framework and in NIST as well. It's basically having a good security starts with having an inventory. Most small businesses can't even give an inventory of all the different components that make up their environment. Some of those are servers and switches and firewalls and cloud applications and stuff, but a lot of it's just like even their endpoints. Their endpoints, even when they're managed by an MSP, like we have a RMM tool, right? And a lot of MSPs do. But how do you know that all of the devices out there connecting to your customers' infrastructures are in your RMM? You don't always. And what we find often is if you can get an inventory and then you compare it to the logs in Azure Active Directory and see, well, what does this account for all the devices that we're in control of? And it doesn't always. And so that's where conditional access comes in play, because you can actually enable a policy that says, hey, if you're not on the managed device list, you don't have access. So what that does is pretty powerful, because it then makes sure that like if they have access, they're in Intune, and I have control over those devices, and I can wipe them if they were to leave the organization or if they were to become compromised or something. So like I said, the modern tools take us a lot further along that security journey than really anything that we had before. But again, I found that you can't really just solve it with one thing. I'm not able to solve today everything that I need to be able to solve for just using Microsoft tools. Part of that is because a lot of the really like the security hotness, the goodness, like their EDR products, Microsoft Defender, HP, that's all locked up in E5. In the small to mid-sized business, you know, people aren't paying $57 per user per month for software. They're just not doing that. You know, they'll stick more to those like $20 plans or whatever, where you get the Microsoft 365 business. Well, you don't get the EDR, so you got to go somewhere else for EDR. But there's a lot to security, no doubt. But I think the point of it is that you want to be in a good footing. You want to up level yourself, and choosing the right architecture to start from is really good. And then to Michael's point, you know, being able to automate that. So a quick example of this is most all our customers have Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, another critical security control for being able to combat phishing attacks and email and so forth. Well, I just came back from Ignite, and there was a whole bunch of announcements, and one of them is there's a new feature available in Office 365 ATP that has to do with mailbox intelligence and some AI that watches for suspicious patterns in email exchanges between you and common contacts and so forth. Really cool stuff that we can turn on for the whole organization. But now I got to go back through 300 clients and do that. You know, so if you don't have a good programmatic way of accessing those tenants and flipping those settings on and then watching for configuration drift, it can be kind of tough to manage at scale, right? So going back to that infrastructure as code, or like you said, it doesn't matter if you're working with infrastructure. It could be SaaS, like Office 365 is a SaaS service. Well, I want to turn this on across all my SaaS customers. So having a process in place, or having, you know, learning some of those skills like PowerShell, I think is super critical, a good starting point. And maybe even partnering with someone who specializes in automation is not a bad, because you can't necessarily do it all yourself as an MSP. I mean, we don't. Like I said, there's certain things that we outsource to other places, and that's really helped us focus on the things we're good at. And then, you know, just leverage partnerships more.
Yeah, so Zach, I want to bring you back on the field, as I like to say, and I want to catch that last point that Alex made about partnering. And so you're certainly welcome to talk about security controls in Azure and so on, but I think I'd like to ask you a different question about what's your relationship with Michael at Refractor in terms of partnering to get returns on specialization and expertise?
So that third party company.
Oh, you're still muted.
Yeah, at this point I do the Beatles number 9.
Thanks, Alex.
There we go. Zach, go ahead. Partnering with Michael.
Yep, I was actually going to ask Harry if I could just, if you don't mind, if you could just convert me from a panelist to an attendee. I'm learning a ton by listening to these guys. This is fantastic. So through my partnership, I mean, you know, like I was saying before, and you, I think to your point, is, you know, the stuff that, I mean, the stuff that Michael was talking about to a degree, and especially what Alex was talking about, is stuff that we wrestle with all the time, because we know, right? It's there's the stuff that you know that you don't know, and there's a bunch of stuff that you don't even know that you don't know, and it's mind-boggling at this level. And so where my partnership with Michael's company, Michael and his company, I've known Michael for a long time, and so kind of worked through this is, you know, like I was saying, it allows us to bring that R&D piece, the timing on the R&D piece down. It allows us, especially on the Azure automation side, it's huge to be able to, you know, within essentially go into his product, configure some stuff, and have a functioning Azure VM that's almost completely ready to go for the client within an hour or an hour and a half. That's just craziness. I mean, it's really great. So, you know, we're facing those same kinds of issues, not just on the infrastructure side, but clearly we're finding those on the security side. And you know, it is absolutely a huge challenge, because you know, some of the decisions that we have made, some of the vendors that we've gone with, aren't necessarily supporting automation very well. And it's, you know, you do your best trying to do your proof of concept and understanding products and understanding what the automation capabilities are. you make a decision, and then you really start getting down deep into the woods, and it's really, really challenging. And so what I rely upon Michael for, I mean, clearly he's much farther down the road from a standpoint of thought leadership, and not just thought leadership, but actually boots on the ground. So to find somebody, that's why I say, you know, whether it's working with Refactor, which we've definitely chosen to do, or working with another partner who's got that ability to have a vision about, not, you know, across various areas that are important to your core business. You know, if we had not done that, I don't know, I think that we'd still be struggling to get a lot of that stuff going. So clearly it's important, and it also, you know, because when you interact with your peers and with vendor partners, you're going to learn things. You're going to get your eyes open to a bunch of stuff that you had no idea was even a potential gotcha. And as we scale up, like I said, we're small. As we scale up, as we are absolutely attempting to do, you know, you got to do it. So.
Yeah, and if I piggyback on that, thanks, Zach, for that. So to Zach's point too about vendors, so when you're bleeding edge like what we're doing, where we're taking existing tools like Ansible and cloud native templates and even like generic API integrations, and being able to give the full power to build automation content to MSPs. The problem that we currently face, and this is actually something that we worked on with Wood and Spoon specifically, and this will kind of tie back to the Fortinet piece and just generally, is a lot of vendors created their products before they would ever have them deployed programmatically or before they were cloud-based. And so cloud was a secondary piece where it's like, let's take our on-premise stuff and we'll virtualize it and attempt to get it into the cloud. And what you find is that trying to actually deploy some of these products programmatically, completely automating them from start to finish with the infrastructure, the configuration, and then also being able to leverage, you know, programmatic capabilities around remediation, doesn't exist in some of the products out there. And the other piece to it is, or it does, but you have to use their proprietary management tools to do it. And so, you know, from a standpoint of like, you know, if that's the case and I have a console to manage a bunch of different firewalls out there, I may want to be able to then, you know, tie into, you know, ConnectWise manage and create a ticket. And then I want to maybe drop the configuration of what I've just deployed into, you know, say IT glue or, you know, something else that I'm going to drop it into. The overall point I'm trying to make here, though, is there are different systems where you want to do different things from an automation standpoint, but we have to have vendors on board with being able to provide their products in a way that we can programmatically deploy them, so that MSPs and MSSPs and, you know, anybody that wants to be able to now deploy and create more sophisticated automation, because it shouldn't just be I'm just deploying this one firewall and then I want to do the configuration. There's a much bigger solution story there, even if you start small, because you're trying to add over time to the solution that you're providing to your customer, because the whole premise is, you know, the more you can add value to them, the more you obviously can build out your service contracts with them. And so back to my point, so one of the things I do like about Fortinet versus some of the other partners or some of the other competing vendors out there is that they have spent a fair amount of time in providing capabilities around or content around Azure specifically, but other cloud providers too, and then also other tools too. So we work very heavily with Ansible, which is an IT automation tool out there. And so there are a lot of modules built in to make it easier to be able to configure Fortinet products. And so I think that portion of it is where vendors need to focus on, is what tools are people using out there, what should they be using, and how can I make the lives of my partners easier so that they can actually just continue doing what they're doing, but able to bring on additional, you know, cloud services or their product offerings without having to spend, like to Zach's point earlier, a ton of time in R&D, which most service providers just can't do. They just don't have time. So I'm off my
All right, so folks, we have about 4 minutes left, 4 or 5 minutes left. It's been, needless to say, a full lecture. So let's see, Alex, if you want to go ahead and take this slide, since you submitted this in our planning meeting, and then I'll wrap up the event.
Yeah, this is just to demonstrate that we're making a leap here. You know, we probably haven't had this big of a leap since we went from Novell networks to Windows Server, right? It's similar now. It's actually even more so. I think it's more complex now than it's ever been in some ways, as you know, to Michael's point, because there's so many options and there's so many different ways of doing things. But that having been said, in the small to mid-sized market, you know, this representation is pretty much what we're doing. What we're seeing a lot of is that, like, if you were previously had like Active Directory, we're doing that in Azure Active Directory. If you were managing devices with group policy and you were primarily doing corporate issued PCs, you probably have seeing a lot more mixed BYOD type environments, especially with mobile devices. And Intune can manage the whole gamut, all of that. You know, going from a security, you know, if you spend a lot of time, you know, working with a perimeter-based model, whether we're talking about a firewall at the edge of a network or you're talking about an access control list, which is on like a container-based model where you're putting, you know, security on a container and think like, oh, it's safe now, but usually that's not really adequate in the modern era. Data is just too slippery. So you want to be able to have protections that follow data around, and being able to manage and like data on the endpoints as it's traveling, things like Windows Information Protection, for instance, or endpoint DLP. All of that's possible through the modern tools like Intune, EMS, Office 365 ATP, protecting, you know, protecting you at the application layer rather than in some kind of physical place like a building or something. And then in communication, I mean, we have a lot more tools than we've ever had before. Teams, Yammer, you know, email, OneDrive, just all kinds of stuff that we just didn't have previously. So there's more communication channels to manage, and you know, what's the right place for the type of communication you're trying to hold. A lot of customers find, you know, that to be a complex thing to navigate, and there's opportunities at each one of these here for MSPs. I mean, you can decide to specialize just in that collaboration platform area if you want to. That's where I'm going to be spending a lot of my time over the next year or so, is moving up the stack. I'm no longer looking at like the bits and bytes and the network infrastructure and all that stuff as much. I'm looking at, you know, how do people collaborate? How can we make that more effective? You know, how can we help them utilize some of the more modern tools that are available to them? And, you know, it just keeps going from there. So like line of business applications, you know, if they were traditionally a SQL Server hosted app or something where they're just had a thick client on a Windows desktop, there are other options now. I mean, yeah, you got SaaS out there, but you also have opportunity to build your own type of apps with Power Apps, Power Automate, they call that now. It's just renamed from Flow. But you know, being able to automate business processes using the tools available to you in your subscriptions that you already likely own if you're doing Office 365. And then, of course, newer solutions like Windows Virtual Desktop, where you can still take some of those legacy apps and so forth, put them into Azure and give a modern experience where you can access them from any device and have that Windows desktop experience still. So they're like pretty much no matter what you're trying to do, you can probably find a way to do it in the cloud, maybe 10 ways to do it in the cloud. These are just ways that we frequently solve it for our customers. But there is a lot out there, and it's an exciting time in technology.
Well, there we have it. So folks, I want to be the first to say thank you for attending this lecture in the MSP Tech Talk Fall Quarter Series. Number 2, have a great Thanksgiving. Number 3, be sure to get out there on Saturday after Thanksgiving, the 30th of the month, for Small Business Saturday. And that leads me to a shout out to our community sponsors. So SureWeb last year sponsored a contest surrounding Small Business Saturday that was really cool, $1,000 prize to one lucky MSP. And of course, Fortinet has been here with me at Ingram 1 in Denver, Colorado at the Gaylord over by the airport. So, and especially final thank yous to Alex, Zach, and Michael. And Zach, hang in there, man. You keep us real out there in the S of SMB in terms of this conversation. So totally appreciate you doing that. And Jenny in the radio control room, thanks as always. Have a great sabbatical. Folks, we'll see you in 2 weeks with the next MSP Tech Talk. Thank you very much.
The spoon salutes you, Harry. The spoon salutes you.
There's the wooden spoon.
Take care, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Happy Thanksgiving.